what do I want to say? So this is the final presentations of the seminar Strategies in Architectural Thinking, taught by Olaf Gipser. And well, I'm pleased to give the floor to him and to welcome Philip Hertz from the TU Delft's Department of Architecture, and then of course Sana and Ludo and myself to be respondents to the work. So, and we give the floor over to you, Olaf, to maybe give us a synopsis of the assignment and maybe even, well, the seminar, the 6-part seminar itself. So.
Yes, hey, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you complete and all, yeah, unfortunately on the screen, but hey, nice that we are here. Welcome to the presentation. I'm very excited to see the results. We have been, I think last time we talked maybe some 4 weeks ago or so, and I know there has been much development. Well, the assignment is part of our seminar, Strategies in Architectural Thinking. What have we been doing in a nutshell? I think, well, the seminar is concentrating on a number of themes. First seminar is collections. The second seminar is on type. The third seminar is on the production of social space. And the fourth theme of the seminar, there are sometimes double seminar on one theme, is on the notion of the post-human. And I think the ambition of the seminar was to maybe dive into a number of post-modernist topoi, themes. It's in a sense a kind of a revisiting of some of the postmodern architectural discourse, and very much in the fashion of that type of thinking to link themes of architectural theory with themes of cultural theory, and somehow investigate some lines of relationships and influence on that. And what we did in the parallel to our seminar, where we, let's say, in fact, combined the discussion on texts from architectural theory with texts from cultural theory, and we discussed many examples, mostly architectural projects that somehow fitted the theme, sometimes projects from other fields. And the seminar, the assignment of the seminar run parallel. There was a work parallel that evolved with the seminar. And I think you will give a much more elaborate introduction to the seminar. I'm also kind of interested to hear the reframing maybe of the seminar from your side. Maybe from my side, what I can say is we chose the building type of the library. And we were we chose a number of exponents of libraries that would run essentially from some examples, from very early examples from the Renaissance to the 19th century, up to the 20th century. And we were interested to what extent that type, let's say, is a side of invention, reinvention, quotation of earlier references, of earlier examples. So we were interested in seeing elements, themes surfacing again and being rethought, being reconfigured in later examples. So what kind of themes have been more or less continuous, came back, resurfaced again, disappeared. And for this, we studied. So every student had one building and studied that building. And it was essentially an exercise of drawing an argument, to make an argument with the technique of drawing. And that's basically what you're going to present now. So maybe I would like to give you the word, and maybe it would be nice to reframe from your side, what was the seminar about, what was your focus point, and what you're going to present.
Yes, so welcome everyone. We will start by presenting all of our individual libraries. So in these individual libraries, we have addressed a series of scales from the city to the building scale, and then to the reading room and the furniture scale. And then we are addressing a series of themes as well, which will come up throughout this presentation. So these are over, well, almost 500 years of history, and the world has changed enormously in this time, obviously. Start, we can get going. So this is my library. I hope you can hear. My internet connection isn't so great. This is Michelangelo's library, and it was built in Florence in 1571. So this library was built by the Medici family, and it was built to increase its standing in the community. They were patrons of a series of buildings in the city. You can see these buildings in the back layer here, the city scale. And they did this because they were a merchant family, so rich, but not yet respected. And this patronage allowed them to become respected in the eyes of the church. And eventually they sort of became the most powerful family in Florence. And eventually also then the Pope became a Medici as well. So knowledge was closely linked to the church, and few people would be literate during this time. So you can't really consider this to be a regular public building. Street access, and instead you go through a series of thresholds from the street, getting gradually more and more private as you head into the building. So you have this path through the building where you are sort of leaving the street, and slowly, by getting deeper into the building and also by going up a series of small staircases, you're rising towards the first floor, which, I don't know, maybe you're rising towards knowledge or rising towards God. So through this route, you can see the rhyming nature of the library itself with the church and the church's nave. So you can see the repetition of the columns and the lighting in the main church, with the repetition of the benches and the columns and the windows in the library itself at the top. During this time, books were incredibly expensive. The printing press was very new technology. So books were mainly handwritten on folios of paper and bound in vellum. So they didn't require traditional shelves as we'd now recognize in a library. The bookshelves were actually the desks that the books sat on, and then these books would be chained to the desks to make sure they were not stolen. These books would not survive if they went in a shelf, and there was simply not enough of them to require vertical storage. So construction on this library started in the 15th century, but it took over 80 years, most of Michelangelo's life, and I believe it was finished after he died. And yes, when this building was started, the printing press had just been invented, and the technology hadn't been widely spread around Europe. But by the time it was finished 80 years later, the world had already completely changed, and it was now sort of a European-wide invention. And this was sort of the starting moment of what we now know as the modern library. So it's time for the next presentation.
Maybe it's nice if you zoom in a bit into the drawing.
Yes, here you have the main church, and the library is attached to the side of it. So this is a worm's eye axonometric view, which really gives the quality of the space. And then at the top, you have the reading room, well, the lobby of the reading room, and then the reading room itself, and you can see there the books on the backs of the desks. Okay, I think we need to move on just because I've taken enough time. Maria?
Okay, yes. This is Henri Labrouche's Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. So it was built in 1868. This was, in fact, indeed one of the first public libraries. And so for the map of the city, we can see that it was right after Haussmann's Paris. So I've used the map of this period in order to show the time that the library was built. And if so, this is also this worm's eye axonometric view, where we can see that in this library there is a clear distinction between the archive and the reading room. So basically, it's all in one floor. There's no ascendance, but if we could go to the yes, up. Great. So here we have the thresholds, but most importantly, we have the, so it was, by the time it was the first time that steel was used as a material in order to somehow structure the dome with this artificial lighting. Sorry about the quality. It was supposed to be better in the skylights, but so the thing is that it is one of the first buildings that this material was used. So it was really emblematic, the structure, and also the way the light goes in from the ceiling. And the other important thing about this is that in fact this clear distinction between the reading room and the archive, where the reading room operates as an open public space, and then the archive is only books. You just go there, take the book, and go to the reading room. And it's also really important the ceiling details that we can see in this worm eye perspective. And also the other important thing I forgot to mention is that so this building does not have access to the street. It is enclaved inside a block of buildings, right where it is placed on the map.
Maria, why are the ceiling details important? And maybe a general remark, maybe what would be nice for the subsequent speakers now, also to not only talk about your project, but also try to make links with the previously presented projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in this case, I mean, in comparison to Matthews, we have no staircases and no ascendants towards the library. It's a linear circulation, and again, it was not connected to a church or any other other type of building. So it was mainly library, and that was it. And I in my views, the ceiling and the way the skylight enters the building from the ceiling gives a really this theatrical essence to the reader and the book as well. And I think that we can move on to the next.
Here you can see the Stockholm Public Library, built in 1928 by Gunnar Asplund, which represented a revolutionary and new concept of public library itself. And regarding the site, the library is located at the intersection of two main streets at the feet of the Observatory Hill, which, as you can see, is a steep natural promontory. The location of the library prompted Asplund to apply some of its well-known principles, such as the relationship between object, man, and nature. And the park surrounding the library, as well as the pond, were also designed by the architect. And a very relevant aspect is that both park and library are part of the educational area of the city. But related to the second drawing, if we move a bit, the question staircase connects the city with the main rotunda, giving the visitor the feeling of reaching or at least approaching a temple. In this case, of course, a temple of knowledge. But the four closed wings, which conform the exterior square geometry around the main space, contain offices and study rooms. But the area which highlights the public library as a concept itself is mostly the cylindrical and open to the public main hall or rotunda. And in relation to the third drawing, the building was the first public library in Sweden to apply the open shelving principle. So the visitor can choose the books without having to request the assistance of the library staff. And this meant a new concept that Asplund studied in the US during the construction of the library, but this concept was quite new in Europe. So through the typological study, the central space is understood as a combination between public archive, book container, and reading room at the same time. Above the three lines of bookshelves, we can observe rough surfaces and of the simple walls, but only the books are to stand out. And the tall drum suggests an infinite vault or connection with the sky. So in this case, the idea of having a central main core is connected to Kahn's Exeter Library and also to Stuttgart's library. In both projects and also in Asplund, we can understand the layers and the connection between a center, a core, an exterior facade, and to try to understand what is happening not only in the center, but also between the facade and the main space or main core. Next. Thank you.
Yeah, so here is the Philip Exeter Academy Library by Louis Kahn. So it's also similar with Asplund Library, is a part of the educational academy library in the Exeter city. So because it's Louis Kahn, also it's really, the lights is also really important to this library. So when you enter the building, you will find the lights also from the behind you, and you can find this curved staircase into the central atrium. So in this case, it's also have a link with the as Anna said, is have a link with the the Asplund and the Stuttgart library. And from this atrium, you can see almost all the floors in this library. So also in every corner of this library, there is a core for circulation. So in each typical core, there is a staircase, also elevator, and maybe utilities for the electricity in the library. And the storage for bookshelf also using the open system shelf, and also after that in the outer part of the library you can find the reading area that is connected to the facade. So you could have this light from facade to help you to reading the book. Yeah, I think that's it. Can move on.
Ryan and everybody, yeah. I think it's good to address particularly also the urban level and the furniture level, you know, on all of the projects, because these are the kind of the three levels that you investigated. And by the way, I find it's good also to combine the more, let's say, the information on the library globally, as it can also be read also too, that you reveal a little bit what you also personally figured out when drawing and when discussing your project together with all the other projects. We always said it's a kind of a collective study. So what kind of discoveries did you do by drawing that project, that building, in a sense? Maybe another type of information that you did not find in the reading about that building. So that would be nice also to have on that personal note what the studying by drawing made with you as authors and with you as students.
Yeah, for me, it's the maybe from drawing this building, you can find that this library by Lucan, you can cut it in a quarter of it, and you can just rotate it, and it's can be one building, because it's all the same with the four parts of the corner, and also the furniture also is an interesting thing, because it's become part of the facade. So the furniture is become one with the wall facade. So it's has the same material, and also the windows opening is I think it's really sweet, put in there for this type of furniture. Okay. Thank you.
So we are moving to Martin Luther King Memorial Library, which is located in Washington, D.C., and was designed by Ms. Van der Rohe. It is the central facility of the District of Columbia Public Library, and it is named in honor of the civil rights leader. It is building type is really representative of MIS, and especially rise skeleton, low rise skeleton buildings. So it is part of the American grid. It creates a strong relationship with important buildings such as St. Patrick's Catholic Church and Madame Tussauds, while the corner of the building has a diagonal view towards the National Portrait Gallery. So the threshold, the transition from the building to the city, is being done once you surpass the first row of columns, and through a double door that works as an airlock between the two of the four main volumes. Once you enter the building, you immediately encounter the doors that lead to the vertical circulation. The four main volumes, apart from the circulation, function as shafts and contain all the technical functions of the building. These service cores are what is giving the building the character of the machine, let's say. So the reading room and the archive is arranged in an open plan organization. There is no walls or any architectural element to distinguish them from each other. However, we can see a concentration in the two short sides of the building. So the relationship is wherever the bookshelves give space, you can see the reading rooms expanding. The light penetrates through the ongoing curtain wall that wraps the building. However, it does not reach the central area, and thus the linear artificial light plays a vital role. The furniture configuration is strict and linear and fluctuates from private to communal in the way that you have the possibility to sit in completely separated desks, or you can share your reading with others. So we can continue to the next one.
Hello, it's me, Hang, and again, I have to introduce my library to Jean's screen. So, just feed the screen, please, first. And so, first of all, this library, the Berlin State Library, it's usually being mentioned along with Louis Kahn's Philip Exeter Library, because these are two like important modernism architecture, but they are approaching this typology of library in a different way. So, Georgia, can you zoom to the city scale? Thank you. So to understand this library, we have to travel back to Berlin in the 70s. It was the last piece of architecture to finish this this area called the Cultural Forum. So the iconic this step volume of the Berlin State Library is to, first of all, to block the highway on the east from this cultural forum, and to create a like central open space along with the building on the west side of the library called Senate Guest House. This is very important because this building have never been built, so it is a little bit weird to look at building in modern times. But back in the 70s, when Sharon designed this building, this is a very important building to respond or to react to. So let's go to the building scale. Yes. So Sharon was very good at using staircase as invitations to people to explore the space. So that's why whenever people heading, there's always a staircase to hint or to imply people to explore the space more. And the main reading room area is like a very vast opening space where like a various of events being held. And Sharon used this single continuous north slide ceiling to indicate that this is a common space, but there are people doing different things in this library. And let's go to the last one. And for people who enter this library, it is not complete for them to actually end up with at his or her desk and start reading a book. Yeah, thank you. That's it. I think time's up.
Hello, I'll be presenting the Sendai Mediathek. So Sendai Mediathek in Sendai, Japan was designed by Toyo Ito in 1995, and it was the competition entry which he won. And the library was, the Mediathek was completed in 2001. He very carefully chose the word Mediathek because the library was supposed to be a combination of a place where people came to interact, not just for reading, but also for all other cultural events that were happening in the city. So he had art galleries and exhibition areas on the top floors with cinemas also. So if we zoom into the bottommost drawing of Sendai Media, yeah, so it highlights the bottommost. It highlights the location, which is, it's not extremely vital where it is located, except that it is located next to the city hall and to this boulevard of, which is very famous because it's full of trees. And it's actually accessible from all four sides, but entering from the side of the trees gives a different experience, as Toyo Ito has designed his columns, which are also a metaphor to a forest of trees. So entering from that street would give the best experience of that transformation. Yes, so he also, so basically he perceived Japan to be a place where constant construction is happening and the cities are constantly being modified, which will be reflected in the design. So in the middle drawing, we can, sorry, Georgia. This is a different library, yeah.
I apologize, sorry.
Okay. So, again, the ground floor is conceived as an extension of the street. And in this library, Toyota is inspired by Corbusier's domino structure, because you can easily see the slabs and the columns, which have the same pattern, and also Mies van der Rohe, which is also similar in the library that Georgia presented, that there is a free spatial flexibility and this transparency with the inside and the outside. The institution is devoted to accommodate changing technologies. And if you see in this worm's eye view, the ceiling plans are shown to, because each level has been designed by different interior designers. And that is analogous to the city's composition in different scales and configurations. So the stratification is sort of reflecting on how the city is being composed, which is why, and at night time, these lights highlight different colors. So from the outside, it's very clearly perceived as different layers of the building. If we go up, yeah. So if we zoom in into the library, again, you can see that each level has different furniture. It also has different colors of furniture, materials, etc., which further accentuate this idea of stratification. And the extension of the city is also continuing inside the building, because it has these free planning and there are no fixed or designated spaces for archives or reading rooms. And that is something Ito perceived that in the city, since there are no designated spaces for movement, the library should also be similar. And that is why he did not have many designated spaces. So it creates a dynamic environment which is similar to the city's movement. So the Sendai Mediathek is a mixed program public facility which combines library and art gallery, making it a primary space for the interaction between the city and its people. Thank you.
So this is the Seattle Central Library designed by Oma. It was finished in 2004, and similar to the previous library, it was a time when digitization and multiple forms of media were influencing the design of libraries, in particular, but this one, the archives. It was set in a city that Microsoft is headquartered in, and the library brings the focus back to the books, with the book spiral that acts as an archive flexible to changes in the collection. And in terms of the building, it's surrounded by skyscrapers and highways, and in an area with little public space. The library tries to provide this city amenity in a form that responds to these glass structures and then the landscapes around, with the coast to the right. So then there is this similar blurring between the threshold between the city and the library, similar to the Sendai library. However, it's a little different. The building is created by programmatically defined spaces based on the use and the relationship to stability and instability. And so these solids and open spaces are created, but even the open spaces have a very defined programmatic use that, and the staircases in this library guide the visitors through these different types of spaces and these different programs, and they act as the pathway to find or experience and find the book, and then in the end read and discuss in the living room. So rather than just going straight up or straight down, it starts from below, goes all the way up to the top, and then follows a book spiral down into the center, where the living room, the vast open space here, is where you can enjoy your book and then still have this connection to the outside world. And the idea of the public space being brought into the library becomes important in this space. I think, yeah, we can move on to the next library.
Hello, this is the Stuttgart Public Library by Yi Architects. For the city, it's supposed to be the new kind of city center for Stuttgart. So it's very similar to the Sendai library that was talked about previously, where it's this cube within this kind of mess of form in this ungrid-like shape. You can enter the building on all four sides because it's meant to be kind of this new center and access to the public. So you go through these double facade, which is a grid of glass blocks on the outer facade, into what they call the heart of the building, which is the void. And it's inspired by Boulet's Newton drawing. And the visitor kind of wraps around the staircase to get into the reading room, which is this funnel-like shape with funnel-like openings as well. So it's this series of ascensions, and the staircases switch through each with the skylight at the top of the form. The archive is very similar to Lu Khan's library that was previously talked about, where it's this onion form and it's wrapped around the reading room in between the facade. And the reading room at the top, you can start to see the funnel shape where they have these blue sofas that really play around with the void, which is similar to the Stockholm library that was previously talked about with the archives wrapping around. And you can look down and see the electric light that lights up the void for this reflecting space, which it focuses upwards in. And it's pretty much a combination of many different architectural ideas, which I found through drawing this library, between the Boulet, the Kahn, and it's meant to be this really iconic piece for Stuttgart, and that is the Stuttgart Public Library.
The next library is Folklore Library. It is a new building of 2012, and it is built in a small historical center of the town next to Essen, Germany. The center is so tiny. It consists of a main square and building that surrounded it is a university and cathedral. And the architect Max Dudler completed the composition of this historical complex by adding an equal volume, that is the library. So here the library is very integrated in the historical context. It is not like a central building as it was in a previous libraries. We can go to the scale of the building. The dense structure of the library consists of floors, beams, and shelves. And here shelves play the role of solid elements with walls. It somehow refers to the structure of historical buildings, the same orthogonal grid with the massive sections. So we can say it's like a post-modern way of finding new meanings by referring to existing structures. And from the view of visitor, the path from the city to the book starts with the main square, because the stairs is on the facade that looks at the main square. Then he climbs to the stairs and go to the narrow entrance, climbing up by stairs that is some kind of circulation, and go through columns and bookshelves. He finally sees the reading room of 3 light space. And the reading room itself looks like a big archive. We can see it on the last drawing. Architect play with the scale of same rectangular structure of bookshelves itself, and of structure of column and floors. So by this, there is a sense that the scale of a book is very equal to the scale of visitors, because visitors feels as they are in a bookshelf, not in a reading room. And I think it's interesting to see how bookshelves here integrated, and it's not a furniture, but a part of buildings.
All right, last but not least, I'm going to bring it home, especially for the people in Delft. This is the Library of Birmingham, designed by Meccano Architecten based in Delft. A true library architects, as they did the one in Delft, at the TU, Tilburg, Amsterdam, The Hague, but also the Martin Luther King Library in Washington, D.C. that Georgia described. They renovated it not so long ago. We're in Birmingham now, so if we zoom into the lower section, it's part of an urban renewal scheme to pedestrianize the civic center of Birmingham, together with a convention center, a concert hall, and it connects to a shopping center, flagship stores like the Birmingham Apple Store, corporate towers, and a railway station. Coming in, you are brought to a sequence of escalators going through like a cylindrical setup, which perhaps as references the libraries in Stuttgart and Stockholm. But also I think there's a self-referential thing going on with the cone in Delft. Upstairs, they will find open floor areas where they have shelving and working areas, not unsimilar to the recent libraries by OMA and in Stuttgart, as described by Jacqueline and Jin. There's an array of tables, but also a very long linear one alongside the facade with all these bar stools where hot desking is possible with your Wi-Fi enabled laptops. And maybe to throw it back completely to the first library, yeah, it's the laptops connected to Wi-Fi instead of the books connected to Change, which are studied here. Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you very much. I have a question. Do you have also kind of a representation that somehow, let's say, brings the different researchers or juxtaposes them next to each other?
Yes, we do. We're just about to start that part. I think Georgia is just firing up drawings now.
Cool.
Sorry.
So yes, we have created a genealogy of the type of building that is the public library. So this is our entire drawing, and we will go through we have grouped it. So to just quickly explain what we've done, we've taken each of these 7 aspects of the library that we've been looking at, and we've split those layers out of the drawing themselves. So that is the city, the threshold, the reading room, the archive, the circulation, the lighting, and what's the last one say?
The furniture.
I can't read it, sorry. There we go. And we are looking at how things have been incorporated into the design of the libraries, how they have sort of gone out of fashion and in some cases have come back into fashion. And sometimes you can see quite interesting sort of juxtapositions between features that have been found in the library as a type in the past, but have then come back in more modern buildings. So this is our libraries in chronological order. So starting with my library by Michelangelo and ending in Michael's library by Meccano. Yes, this is all 11 drawings, just as they go in time. So maybe we can move to the next. And if we zoom in a bit, we will go through the grouping. So this layer is all about the relationship to the city. So we sort of found two different ways that these buildings can relate to the city. So what was quite common in the early years of the libraries was that the libraries.
Is it possible can we please zoom in?
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to see. Thanks.
So yes, these libraries are part of an collection. So in my case, it was a collection of the buildings by the Medicis, but this might also be a collection of educational buildings on a university campus, or a collection of cultural buildings to make a cultural area. But then there's another thing, which is the assemblage. And this is a slightly more modern way of creating a city. And this is where the library is sort of taken as a key building within the city centre, and it becomes somewhat of an anchor building for a new area in the city. So I think Georgia is going to go through this grouping.
Yes, so here the second thing that we are examining is the thresholds. And we can see four types of, four groups being formed in this part. The first one is the promenade, where there is this a series of staircases that help you to transit from the building, from the city to the building. As we see, for example, in Matthew's library, Medici library of Michelangelo, or for example, in Maria's National Library in Paris. Then we see a second group coming up, which is the four ways. And we can see that in Anna's library, where the building is penetrated by the four sides. As we see it, for example, in Asplund Library in Stockholm, and interestingly enough, we can find it also in public library, in the public library of Jacqueline. Then we see we have another group which is called double doors, where the entrance is working as an airlock between two glass doors. And we can see it, for example, in Miss van der Rohe building, but also in Sarun's State building. Then the last group is from below, where actually we see that the entrance is under the main volume of the library. There are staircases that takes you and that you can use in order to go into the mass building of the library. Then we have circulation. So what we see here is that there is a defined route. There's a group of defined route where your path through these libraries has been designed. There is one direction, and again we can see that in Michelangelo's library, but also Labrust's library. Then we have the central void, where the circulation is for example, in Asplund Library, the circulation is even around a circular volume or void, or inside it. And then we have the circulation core, where the circulation is vertical and it is concentrated in one in certain volumes around the building. And we can see that, for example, in Nice's Sendai library or Miss van der Rohe's library.
So here I'm going to talk about the reading room. So there are a few different ways that the reading room is arranged in these buildings. With the earliest libraries, the reading room is generally one open hall. For the most part, this is because the libraries were not very large. Then going on, we have two more kinds of libraries. We have the Asplund Library, which has this central space that we've talked about in terms of circulation, but this also becomes quite a social place where the books can be viewed and selected. And actually, the Asplund Library seems to be quite radical in this respect, that this form of building can be seen in the later buildings. And this onion that it creates this grouping of the in the facade reading rooms, where the reading room is on the edge of the building, but you access this edge of the building by going to it via the heart of the building, which is often this large central space. So then in the sort of late modernism period, with Mies van der Rohe and in Berlin, you see this open library hall coming back. Here it's a much deeper plan and it's a much larger library. But then later on, once you get to the internet age, you see a much more, again, this return to this social library, this library with this large central space, and this library with the reading rooms on the edges of the buildings. And then I'll talk about the archive, which sort of pairs quite well with this. So again, we have several kinds of archive. First, in my case, we have the mixed archive and reading room, which is where the books and the consumption of the books happens in exactly the same space. But then when we go to Paris, we see that they become separate. If we just don't scroll too fast, yeah, they become completely separate. So you can devote one space to the storage of books and another one to their consumption. But then we have the wall. So the wall is first seen in Asplund's library. This is where the circulation space becomes very central to the building, and the reading room is then protected by the books. So in the free plan of the late modernists, we have this mixed reading room and archive, but then later on, as these buildings become more social and the circulation space becomes more a key location in the building, this use of the books to sort of protect the sanctity of the reading room becomes back and becomes a lot stronger.
Another thing that element that we wanted to investigate was the lighting. So in lighting, we see that there is one group appearing, which is the facade windows, which we find in older buildings. But we can see that it continues, for example, until the 70s and the Kant's library. Then we have the central light, which starts from the National Library in Paris, but we can see that it is it continues through history. And at this group, the roof functions as the light, brings the light into the building. Then we have the artificial lighting, where there is yes, there are buildings that for example in Miss Library, artificial light plays a vital role, and we can see that also throughout history. And then we have the buildings which have the curtain wall, which started with as a modernist, let's say, idea, but until the end with Mechanos library, we can see that is being used. So the light at this case penetrates through the curtain wall of the building. What is interesting in that part is that the group overlap a lot, and you can see that there are some libraries that are maybe using the central light, but also, for example, they have facade windows or curtain walls.
Then this is our final layer, and this is the furniture in the buildings. So there are 3 different scales, there are different ways this furniture works. So in the Laurentian library, you can see this incredibly private individual furniture, where study is done by yourself and you do not have much chance for sort of group or communal working. Then in Paris, we see the entrance of these communal tables. You are still in this formal sort of office experience, but you can maybe talk to the person opposite you or do some kind of group work or have some kind of communal interaction. And then Asplund, with sort of his early radicalism, you have this social central space where it's actually a lot less formal in the way the furniture is arranged, and it's a lot, and sort of the social aspect of using the library becomes much more present. So to go through the timeline, to carry on along. So yeah, in the modernists, we see this emergence of, we see this quite communal way of studying, and this is where the libraries still have their strong use of being able to access information. But then just where we're looking now, this is just at sort of the moment where the internet has sort of replaced the library's main use as a source has replaced its main use as a source of information, and now the library is much more a civic building to reflect as well, and the furniture is used for all kinds of occupation. So it's a lot easier to then bring your whole family or to meet friends there, and actually becomes a lot less about work and about the finding of information. You often then find variations in the furniture around the building. So there are different conditions for different needs of the building. And with the smaller buildings, which still have a sort of more institutional identity, you can actually see the furniture of sort of the earlier kinds of libraries being more present. So that's our group analysis of the libraries as a type. I would now like to invite our guests and our tutors to ask any questions that they have, and also for the rest of the group to take part in the discussion. Maybe to start, we can use Olaf's suggestion of talking about what we might have learned about the libraries. Does anyone have anything that they discovered about their library, or anything that they found out about the type of the library during this process?
Maybe as the last one to present a very recent library. It seems that these floor plans become much more generic, as do the types of furniture that are being introduced. If I compare it with, for example, the Louis Kahn library that Ryan was analyzing, there's really these special alcoves with bespoke furniture designed for these intimate places, whereas yeah, maybe a library like the Sendai Media Library has more of this generic off-the-shelf furniture. Thought that was an interesting development.
Yeah, definitely, especially for Sendai. I think that most of us always knew about this library when we were in our undergrad, but it was always popular for the structure and how it supports during the earthquake and the tree-like columns. But this is the first time I was actually digging deeper into the elements of the library other than the columns. And as Michael mentioned, the furniture in Sendai is all so custom, and each level has a different design. It was really interesting for me to learn about the interior spaces as well.
I have a question maybe. First of all very great drawings, and I really enjoyed looking at them, especially in more detail. So in that sense, it's a pity that we couldn't print them, but maybe we can still do it in a later moment, because I think the depth of them is very rich. But maybe the question would be, you kind of, the language that you're using, whether it's kind of compatible to describe a lot of the kind of characteristics that you encountered. You obviously use the word public kind of endlessly, and you can, well, there's a whole list of terms that, and I wonder in what sense, if you reflect upon that now, are these kind of terminologies that we use to describe these types of buildings compatible, or do we kind of need perhaps a kind of different vocabulary to talk about it? And then one maybe of the kind of conditions that I would like to point out is here is that perhaps in a kind of transition from, let's say, the rise of the institution, the library as an institution, right, in the kind of let's say in the 19th centuries, or even already in the Renaissance examples, perhaps, towards the kind of library today. And then you see already gradually a shift towards this kind of digitalization and whatever. And I'm curious, because also with Olaf, you had also a seminar on the kind of the idea of the post-human, right? So can you maybe even kind of project then this idea of the library into a kind of future where perhaps it's no longer so kind of human-centered? So in that sense, in what sense are these kind of terminologies like public still compatible to talk about libraries in perhaps in the next decades to come? And maybe you can come up with different words to kind of describe similar notions.
I think what's really interesting about the early libraries is their primary function is for the storage and use of information. And then it's in sort of in the 20th century, you see this emergence of this public idea of the use of a library where sort of the masses are invited in to share this information. And now that we've had this digitalization, there does seem to be this crisis in the function of the library where the storage of information becomes secondary, and it is actually this public invitation, and it becomes this sort of public living room. I think of when it's not locked down, it's just sort of a space for homework and a space for working, and it's a lot more of a social situation. But of course, you do still see buildings in this sort of post-human sense that you're talking about, which share this attribute of the storage and the use of information. So this could be the data centers that we've been talking about quite, but it could also be something like the seed bank vaults that they have in the Arctic, where everything's to be frozen, where it's actually all about saving this information and making sure that we can access it at a later date. And in those buildings, there is very little in the way of sort of a public function.
Maybe one of the things I can think of as well is that we kind of, let's say, also historically become a bit more critical towards this idea of public, because from the kind of Medici library on, it was not so public at all, right? So it was always a kind of, although perhaps architects like to explain their projects as very public, but it was always a kind of very well, peculiar balance between public and exclusionary, right? So yeah, perhaps it's also about kind of defining that balance, or redefining that balance.
But maybe the word public is even completely wrong, that it's more institution or institutional building. I mean, now if everybody knows the public library here in Delft, for example, do you know it?
Yeah.
45 degrees from the HEMA. I mean, it's now branded as open, right? So it's basically has undergone a renovation. It is basically part library, part cultural center, part Pinterest cafe, part sitting area where you bring your cats to read magazines and other pets and your children, if you can consider them cats too. So I mean, this kind of thing, what is then the institution of the library? I guess I would say is a kind of repository of knowledge, maybe. It's just a question there, you know. What is the difference between institutions and publicness? Because I think there's sometimes maybe a conflation of both of these terms, and I don't think that they necessarily mean the same thing, right? I mean, when the library emerges with the Bibliothèque Nationale, right? That's the beginnings of institutions of the state, of the, you know. So I think it would be interesting to look at these things maybe through that lens.
Yeah, so looking at the Seattle Central Library, where a lot of the, I guess, literature about it is about this publicness and connection to, or providing this public space for the city around it. A lot of the building is not actually a space that's used or occupied by the public, and I would say a majority of it is for the functioning of the library, and that was kind of that disconnect between that verbiage and the building itself was interesting to find out during this process.
I think it also depends on the purpose of library, because, for example, the library that I studied is a part of institute, so it's like more institution library, not like public library. And some libraries, like Stuttgart Library, it is a center, new center. That's why it's need to be more public, like an attractive point.
But again, can you define then these terms? So maybe we should really talk about, let's say, the people that you kind of encounter in these libraries. Because obviously, in the kind of case of Seattle, we can talk about homeless people who come there. But I want you to kind of define then what is that part of the kind of publicness of it?
And we can also make a distinction between state institutions and public and private institutions.
But none of these libraries are private, right? They're all basically governmental or municipal in some sense.
Also,
But the
in this Folkwang Institute, I think that was Maria, no? I don't know. Is that some kind of charity or some kind of private?
That's what I thought. I think it's Massa's library, but that's what I thought. That's why I said that.
Mm-hmm. And the one the Laurentiana. So were the Medici, was that still as let's say private citizens that they initiated it? It wasn't yet the Medici being in charge, or was it?
Yeah, so this was before the family, I think this was before the family really had sort of control over Florence as a whole. This was quite early on in their sort of rise to power. And of course, the library wouldn't have been public in those days. There would have been controls on the access, but also just the idea of being literate in those times and actually being able to read the books already creates this huge disbalance, and there's sort of isn't really a concept of the public to use this space. Whilst later on, I think it becomes a lot more about it being a space which is deliberately accessible to all.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Olaf, go ahead.
No, I wanted to switch the subject, so maybe you go ahead and then I come back.
Yeah, I mean, I also would have other issues to discuss more, but I think, I don't know to what extent there was how you arrived at the, let's say, the list, the kind of to produce the genealogy, how you decided on these 11, if the list was there on beforehand, or if it's sort of developed.
No, I gave the list.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think there the sort of, how do you say, the kind of line or the spectrum traced, I think it's almost more about how things are architecturally articulated on these three scales that all the drawings have in common, rather than on the kind of particular programmatics of the library, as in a sense the whole, if I would say even institutional would be even a kind of vaguer thing in this case than the publicness, as in a sense it's a storage typology where these three scales I think come in to articulate how somehow the scale of the kind of container as furniture sits in the container as building, sits in the city as a container of all kinds of different type of containers. So I think the lineage or the cases seen together become interesting, I would say, on this on the level of, let's say, how this containerness on the tree scale articulates itself. I would say even beyond the specificity of the library and if it's public or whatever happened to that, why it even still exists in the first place. I would say beyond that. So I don't know if you wanted, Olaf, if you wanted to talk more about drawing conventions. I don't know which other topic you wanted to address.
No, indeed. Let's say I thought it was interesting also to address this idea of drawing, and I think, to me, honestly, the first part of the let's say to draw is a way of editing. To draw is a way of merely designing or reinventing or reframing, a project by the means of your own of your reading. So you, in a sense, you reconstitute a project. Drawing is editing. Drawing is making a selection. And I thought that was where maybe the first series of drawings on the level of the individual projects works better. I like very much some of the drawings that you did. First of all, I think it would have been interesting also to say something about the conventions that you applied. I mean, you had certain particularities, for instance, certain elements you blacken, so you invert in black and white, and the other one you keep, let's say, conventional. So I think that is something to address and to talk about. I think you also, I thought it was interesting that you switch between a bird's eye and a frog's eye perspective, or axonometry for that sake. Because I think the frog eye, let's say, does, let's say, address a certain spatial architectural construct that is typical for the library, that somehow with which that means of representation fitted quite well many libraries. And I thought it was interesting why that was like that, and where maybe that means of drawing convention maybe could less represent a library or a certain idea of the library. So in fact, I think there could be a discussion. On the one hand, I understand, and that's also what we said, we have a certain convention throughout the class to approach these libraries, that they become comparable at first place. But I think there could have been, let's say, a discussion from you as drawing authors to what extent these conventions can transport an idea appropriately, or more successful or less successful. And I think also on that level, I think there could have been a discussion, or let's say there could be a discussion, not, let's say, it's not, I don't want to frame it in regretting terms, but I think that the drawings are ripe enough also to clarify which elements you left away and which elements you showed. And I think sometimes you also clearly have, let's say, emphasized that. But I think this is, with some of the drawings, there was for me a question: what was the logic of combining certain architectural elements or certain, to kind of focus on a certain corner of the building? Because maybe, I mean, the whole that studio is in a sense a second studio that does this drawing assessment on the library as a building type. We did it last year, and at some point last year we looked also into construction, into different levels of architectural elements, and a little bit in the way like you make it in the second part, where you in the end you zoom out on an isolated element that somehow features within the architecture project. But I think for me, really interesting, some of the drawings, I think that you really have shown, they show to me the building really in a different way as I have been seeing it so far. You really reinvent and reconstruct the project in a way that I think is interesting, and that could, let's say, trigger more discussion, more more clarification. What elements are shown and what's the relationship between elements? I mean, you in a sense, you make ensembles of different fragments, of different physical elements, structural element, the window, furniture. And I think the resonance of how certain elements do interact, that's really in some of the drawings in a quite interesting way, let's say, coming out. And I think on that level of trying to identify architectural devices that in a sense support some of these changes that the library type experienced within a changing cultural framework. What were these moments of inventions or of reconfigurations? These are things I think are really for me the interesting moments of the discussions that also you pointed out. And maybe this overview what you show here the elements maybe they get isolated to part in a kind of in an extreme analytic, in the sense of analyzing as isolating, as isolating a singular element. And because, for instance, take the idea of lighting. I mean, there's not only the element that allows light to come in, but lighting, of course, needs a reflecting surface, and lighting often is related to either the reading or to the promenade. So it relates to other elements. It cannot be considered alone. And exactly this kind of, these micro ensembles of elements and how they kind of interrelate. This is for me the interesting part of your research, and I think that comes in many projects very well out in one of the three scales that you have been showing. I don't know whether this was more a comment maybe, but maybe to turn it into a question. This reconstructing a project, this editing, what to leave away, what to bring in. I must also really give you a compliment, because this was really everything else in a linear process. This was really, many of you had redrawn your drawings many times, and I could sometimes sense a sense of frustration from your side when I, let's say, still kind of pushed it, or maybe it had also to do that maybe my question was maybe not always so clear for you, or maybe in general. But that redrawing, in a sense, I think if I really look at particularly the first series of drawings, that I think was very productive, that figuring out how many elements the drawing, let's say, can accept in order to still carry an argument, or when it's too much, when are elements redundant, when are elements essential. Maybe some of you can say something about that process that you went through to come up to this series of drawings.
Maybe just to talk about the frog eye view that you just mentioned, and sort of the decisions around that. So of course he set us this challenge to show the process of this movement from the city to the book. And then of course with this movement from the city to the book came this reduction in scales, which is very challenging to show in a drawing. So that's why we chose these three scales to try and show the full aspect of this movement. But yes, the middle drawing, the frog eye view, was an interesting choice, and Obviously, you've been showing us Sterling's drawings, which we all know well. And we found it remarkable how there was this sense of place and this sense of occupation of the building that you could find within these drawings. And we thought it was very useful to show how you move through these buildings and what it would be like to be within itself. And there was also the fact that, especially in the later libraries, as the floor becomes more and more freed up to be more flexible, the roof becomes a more and more technical space. So yes, we were using the frog eye view to try and demonstrate what was happening in the roof, in the ceiling. But yeah, maybe if someone wanted to talk about how they went about choosing and editing their drawing.
I think for all of us, maybe we initially started with the whole building and just looking at the circulation with the whole. But slowly, as we started having these discussions amongst ourselves as a group, we realized that it's not the same. For some of them, it's a vertical movement. For some, it's horizontal. And because of that, we realized that having the whole architectural building itself is not conveying our story as a collective. And that is when the whole process of reduction started happening. We started reducing elements, and the ones which are not necessarily important in the sense that we don't really encounter these things in the circulation from the city to the book. And that whole process of reduction started bringing our collective together, and that really helped in framing how the final drawings came out.
I'm wondering, are the drawings too full still? Let's say, I'm kind of thinking now, of this project as a continuous process that maybe has another sequence, maybe then, for the next generation or whenever. But for instance, your series of, for instance, the thresholds, the lighting, the furniture, what I just was mentioning, nearly, it seems to me, would need not only that isolating framing that you did, and I understand also that was also somehow using the material, the drawings that you produced, and somehow go analytically about them. I understand that also within the available time. But it seems to me that maybe these different, to focus on something like lighting or something like furniture, you would again needed to bring other elements into relationship with such an element in order to understand that assemblage, so to speak, between different element types. And so I'm wondering how these, are the drawings, for instance, there is a very big difference between the upper drawings, the individual project drawings, and that one, because the upper one are quite full, and this one is quite, let's say, is extreme isolation. I'm wondering what you felt were the drawings too full, were the drawings too empty? How do you find your projects or your drawings, let's say, if you look at them, if you compare them, if you discuss them? Is it clear, basically, would it have been important to distill 5 axonometries or 5, let's say, drawings per project instead of 3, or several, but isolate them much more in order to get an understanding of certain architectural devices?
May I respond? I think that having 11 projects studying on these 3 drawing skills was very productive, and we learned a lot. But perhaps if you want to go beyond that and really compare very particular elements, I wonder if it makes sense to compare all 11 then, or maybe just to choose 3 or 4 in which you can go really specific and then find a very suitable medium or type of drawing to represent that. I think right now,
but I will interject in that, because my comment from, it's the issue of genealogy, is the kind of key word here, and the interrelationship, how one project or set of ideas builds upon another. So in that sense, I think you need all 11 of them, or all 11 have basically been chosen because they fit their, I don't want to dare say canonical, but let's say they're canonical, or they're exemplars that are in architectural culture, that are defining moments in, in the type. And so in that sense, I don't think that you can basically reduce to do that comparison. I mean, I think maybe going back to this, I mean, the work is very, very nice. But now I question really this matrix for the genealogy, if the matrix is the correct organizational tool to organize the information. I mean, maybe this was the first step to that. And then maybe after this, there could be another way of organizing that. I don't know. What do you think, Philip? I mean, I don't know if it's a kind of key tree structure, or if it's, you know, a reassembly of the parts.
Yeah,
but right.
I mean, also given sort of our particular understanding, because of which is sort of produced by these cases now, I would say that maybe the sort of generative or genealogical aspect, and I think it has a repercussion on the way of drawing, like what Olaf was asking about. Maybe it almost operates not so much on the level of the building per se. It's sort of identifying the let's say the ingredients and how they kind of recombine to produce to each time produce a kind of particular synthesis. The extent, I mean, I would say the extent to which at the beginning of the spectrum or the genealogy, I mean, what's at stake is essentially an interior, I would say, right? So the library as a thing is a space, which is a container, but as well would be somebody's library. It's a room in another structure. It's not yet emancipated itself to, let's say, being a building. It's one of the ways a room can sort of incarnate, you know, the library as part of another institution. And then your series would start, I would say, with the Laurentian as one where there is a kind of first emancipation, where this room or space becomes its own thing, but still attached to a complex, right? So it becomes a kind of extrusion, or a kind of a pimple, let's say, on something else. In this case, this sort of monastic complex of San Lorenzo. I don't know exactly how it works. And then sort of gradually, I would say, sort of slowly emancipates itself from being a kind of interior to an autonomous presence in the city. And I think maybe there, you know, I'm sure you maybe discussed it, but I think the aspect of it also sort of proliferating becomes almost a topic in itself, because it starts to proliferate as a building, right? The moment Carnegie starts to fund all these libraries, it's sort of a way of the library having to be everywhere, even not in the city. You know, it's sort of, you have these kind of rural ones in Wyoming, no? This kind of small town, almost copying the notion of the, how do you call it? The notion of this kind of club libraries that used to be there, no? So I think the moment the building comes in, it enables it to proliferate, you know, because it's no longer about getting books everywhere. No, there is basically, the books are substituted by this kind of building type that can be put somewhere, which you then imagine is filled by books, but we're not really sure, you know, how many books there would be. So I think maybe there is something to say about that. It's sort of, it's the formation of it kind of gradually becoming a type, which of course now I guess we are beyond. In the last examples, the questions are all about, I would say, even the lack of evident sort of relevance sort of becomes its strength, because it can become all these sort of things, because it's just called a library, where there is some kind of convention about it, that it's about access and civic purpose and all this kind of thing. But since it doesn't really need to perform as such anymore, it can be everything. And I think that still ties to its sort of, that's still tied to the kind of loose relationship to it not, being essentially a kind of interior, rather than immediately, a kind of building. So I think that has to do with the construction of a kind of genealogical structure, which is almost, could be even, you could almost use it as a kind of critique even of the notion of type, in this sense, which is sort of not really works here, right? Because it's I don't know if that answers, if that reflects on what you were saying, Solomon.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Maybe to continue on that note, Philip, in the research for the Birmingham Library, I looked at their social media presence. And of course, this was during lockdown in the UK. So then there's a lot of people asking when they can come back when they open up again, but they don't ask to come back for the books or their archive, but they want to work there on their own, I don't know, set pay freelance gigs.
No, exactly. No, absolutely. But again, that would maybe not be, I'm not sure the extent to which spaces are intended for that. They tend to produce this kind of space, right? I remember in the US, since even without COVID and all these kind of things, people tend to go work in the library just to be somehow, it's sort of silent. So that's fine. But at the same time, you have this sort of idea that there is other people, which is in, where you share the, the situation with. So there is something accommodating about it. So, and of course, the situation now makes things which you imagine to be rather superfluous a necessity, as I don't know to what extent the Euro or the example, Michael, I think that one, I never really thought about this one in particular, but I don't know to what extent I'm too harsh by saying that it seems to be that there you reach a kind of climax, or the type reaches a climax as being almost some kind of catalyst of a sort of redevelopment. And since
project, Philip?
The Birmingham one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So where, Birmingham is sort of the epitome of the city that kind of wants to reinvent itself every 3 months because of, sort of wants to literally sort of always, be something else, be anything except Birmingham. And then the library, since it's somehow, it's very difficult to say anything bad about the library, no? It's not very evil. It's not very, what can be wrong with the library? So it's like, say, you throw something in there that anybody who would critique, do we need another library, would be sort of immediately dissed aside as being an anti-cultural sort of whatever. And then in order to produce a kind of redevelopment of a city center, like you say, with all kinds of development around it, where the kind of neutral plant in it would be the library, because it's like almost like as if it's the built form of the park. Who can be against the park? If you're against the park, you're an evil, an anti-humanist. So you always say you always have to smile when they propose a park, which is which seems to generate this kind of thing. And but I don't know to what extent it's interesting now that then there is a kind of next step. Yeah, this thing which is maybe futile and just is just public space, whatever it is. Yeah, it starts to become a necessity retroactively, because all of a sudden people need to escape their confines to be able to function, to survive somehow. It's almost like a form of squatting beyond the idea of, you know, you would only need to squat to have a roof over your head. No, it's sort of squatting to be able to participate. And since we don't have that many public bathhouses anymore, right? Since we got rid of them a long time ago, since we had our private bathrooms, you know, we cannot go survive there. The library has somehow kind of taken over this role as a space. And this is, by the way, another thing which I thought was interesting on the level of element, or not so much interior, but a kind of to find elements within, and not necessarily just a bookshelf or the as a furniture, but if there is elements particular to the library, like Olaf mentioned, or reiterate the lighting issue, these kind of things, right? Aspects, elements, which are sort of inside the totality of a building, how there is a particularity related to the library there, no? I mean, I'm not talking about the necessarily this kind of sort of, I would say, typical things like these American university libraries. They kind of copy, I guess, the English ones, and there are always these kind of green low lamps, right, in the reading room. So there is, it's like almost, it's almost there. I don't know how functional that is, or if that's good for your eyes. I don't know. I'm sure there is a reason, or there was a reason, but now it's sort of, it has become somehow some way to kind of recognize the conventions of the space, right? It almost means, shh, you have to be quiet, you know, you don't need to sign. There is these green low lamps, it sort of transcends. Same thing, I would say, with the, I don't know if there is other, even more antique relationship in the element of how the space is constructed. I think the Labrouste example starts to play with some of the kind of cellular, kind of almost the classical types, no? This sort of arrangement of this sort of conglomerating domes related to the lighting, also because it doesn't really have the facade. I mean, you'll never find a picture or of the facade of the Labrouste. It's a pure space. It's inside, I don't know, what is it, the Palais Richelieu?
Yes, it's enclaved.
Yeah. So, and the Richelieu was an hôtel particulier, I imagine, of Richelieu. And it had this kind of courtyards, and then gradually they started to fill in the courtyards, right? Exactly. And then obviously something changed around it. But I think it was with the Labrouste reading room that it became the Bibliothèque Nationale for the first time, right? So, and then afterwards you had the big round reading room, which was somebody else. So it's, you know, start to kind of occupy these insides, but sort of still kind of using a language that made it into a library, you know? It's not just because of the books there, it's about orchestrating this lighting, creating this sort of secondary spaces. And I think, you know, that would be a subset, maybe another kind of genealogy next to the one on the scale of the building, and next to the one on the scale of the city, and next to the one on the scale of the bookshelf. You know, how there is different elements. For example, I don't know, the thermal window, which, you know, it's sort of in Palladian architecture, which sort of comes from the bathhouse, but then starts to be adapted to a certain type of space, this kind of arched window with a tripartite subdivision. And they sort of almost start to mean, I mean, I think somewhere, I think it transferred to the library space, no? Because, and I don't know to what extent it would be interesting to have a kind of subset of elements, you know, the little, maybe even the little ladders and weird stairways that are kind of particular to the library setup. Yeah, things which somehow belong there, and that's produced by that particular environment. What was the question? I forgot.
I think that those are all very good conclusions, Philip. Reflections
It
on the
was
work.
not really a conclusion, I'm sorry.
Well, a reflection.
I appreciate as well. No, I think that was the question. You know, how eventually to continue was actually, you know, how to that idea of genealogy and how to take that eventually on. I think, Philip, that you somehow replied, or you, and at least are there specific elements to the library type, and also what you said about this forming of a library type and kind of this integration, I think is also really a very relevant, let's say, a comment that we can very much see also along this chronological sequence. Yeah.
Do we have to stop, or is there still time?
We can have 2 or 3 more minutes. Do you have another thought? And then we need to wrap up.
Maybe somebody else wants to say something first.
I don't see any hands raised, so. Philip?
Maybe one more thing. I don't know about the drawing convention issue. Apart, I'm not going into the detail of it, but it's just something that would interest me to know what you think. For very practical reasons, I always ask the master students to at some point in their design process, to even when they're not done yet, to make this Choisy drawing which you make, the kind of wormhole, right? I think or somebody talked about it briefly. I think it was maybe Matthew mentioned it. I don't remember the kind of, it's sort of descriptive, right? It's sort of it's section also. It gives you information about the building, but at the same time the experience of the space. So it sort of uniquely combines somehow something that really approximate, especially in certain spaces, the effect of the space, because you sort of look into it, but at the same time gives you both plan and section potentially. And then it's very flexible about how to organize the section surfaces without really needing a 3D model. I mean, I'm sure you all have. Did you make a 3D model before you drew these things, or did you draw the thing? So I think that's a legitimate question, right? Why would you draw the 3D model? You only need one view, right? You kind of can decide this, and maybe it's much more practical to draw the 3D model first, that in order to produce this one view. But essentially, you wouldn't really need it, right? Because you're not going to give us an animation walking through a 3D model or something, right? So this is then the kind of things I bother my students with by saying, almost don't draw a 3D model, right? Just draw the thing. Especially because if not, they start to think about all kinds of other things. So what I'm saying, or what I wanted to know, maybe if some of you can think about it, you can also tell it at a later point. But I want to, yeah, sometimes I'm wondering why I'm asking this to them, because maybe it's very obvious to just say, yes, it's both descriptive and both experience. So it could be interesting in a kind of design development. But then sometimes I feel maybe there is something more interesting to say about this particular representational technique, you know, apart from the fact that clearly Choisy thought it made sense because he drew like 5 million of them, right, of existing buildings. So there is just maybe that in itself produced the convention, the fact that it had this sort of encyclopedic potential. But maybe in your experience, there is other things that come above, no, come out of it. I don't even know if we have to privilege it so much. It's a kind of open question.
But maybe sorry?
Yeah, I was going, if you don't mind, just to respond quickly on the And I think, at least for me, the 3D model was beneficial because when you can in the process of trying to define this view, right? I think all our drawings went through multiple different views. We didn't take one and then that was the one we ended up staying with necessarily. The fact that you can rotate around it, and it's interesting that prior to this, yeah, I never considered using the bottom view during my 3D modeling process. But that's always been something that's been available due to the kind of technique that we're using. And looking at the building from that, which initially is really strange to look at it that way, even if like just even figuring out how to navigate the screen in that type of view took a little bit of time. But yeah, if we could all visit the libraries and then you establish the view that you want, and then yes, you can just, I think, just create it, the one image. But I think the act of creating the model is to kind of simulate being in the space and then entering that building digitally, but and to help you find the view that you're looking for.
I think it's an interesting question, and also me being, let's say, educated in the pre-digital, let's say, phase. I mean, I did not anticipate that you all would do a 3D, but I saw that happening with most. With some, I wasn't, let's say, sure. From my background, I would probably have started, in a 2D way, a little bit like Philip frames it. But I think the approach is very different. I think it's two different ways of going into an analysis, because I think if you do a 3D model, you kind of nearly come, let's say, you go globally. Basically, you make the overall scheme and look what are the elements that fit to that overall level. But I believe that if you zoom in from a location, you, so to speak, you start nearly kind of bottom up, from a certain location, and maybe the hierarchy of elements that you take into your drawing are different when you start from a location than when you start from, let's say, the overall, let's say, scheme. So I think that it seems to be a question of technique, but as a question of technique, I do think it triggers different conclusions and a different trajectory of work.
I think it's also helpful about seeing what to strip, like what is because you're in terms of the actual drawing, because you're looking at it and you're seeing this is blocking this, let me hide this particular item, and what does it do to the drawing? And then you see, oh no, it doesn't, so you re-unhide it. And you're finding this balance, going back to Olaf's kind of question, I think earlier, is you're trying to show the idea of the library at its minimalist forms, but you're also comparing it to 11 other libraries. So something that might not be as important to your library that you wouldn't have decided it was, but it's important to, say, another library. And in order to compare it, you need to show it in the drawings. So it's these two layers of showing what's essential, showing what's non-essential, and also showing what's comparable to these 11 libraries. And I think the 3D model really helps to be able to see and start to play with what to hide and what not to hide in terms of the actual drawing.
You could merge the results of this seminar with the previous one and have the agglomerated what is it, kind of agglomerated library complex in the imaginary, or whatever it was called, in the imaginary city. I mean, I think there is a kind of potential overlap between the two exercises to have the kind of scale of the city come into this exercise and the scale of the building come in the previous one. I think there is something they have in common, these two approaches. I don't know, I'm sorry, Olaf, the previous, I don't know if you know the other seminar they just presented before this one. It was this exercise by Jean-Louis of kind of making what was it called?
Color City.
Say again?
Imaginary cities.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, we're not supposed to call it collage cities, but superficially they were collage cities.
I think all good reflections. I mean, maybe just going back to end this. I mean, I think the point that's brought up about the 3D model is an interesting one, but also somebody who is analog or on the cusp of that between the analog and the digital. I mean, I do think that sometimes what we see here is with the 3D model, the insistence on an overabundance of detail when it is not needed because it is modeled. And I think that when you have to start the drawing by hand, or not by hand, but manually, when you have to look at plans. I mean, there's, let's say, a different way of comprehending spatial knowledge, you know, because let's say probably Olaf, Philip, Sana, and I look at plans and sections and maybe an axonometric and construct this thing in our imagination with a set of conventions, different kinds of line weights, talk about different depths of space and section cuts. And that's something where, you know, I don't know how to basically describe this. You have to basically use your head to construct this image. And there's another modality at work versus when one just immediately enters into monkey mode to do the 3D model. It's seen because what the word was used was the production of the model. So there's already the kind of discrepancy that you have to first produce the model before you can start to think, or before you can start to make a project or do an analysis. And this is, I think, a real, and this just has come up now in other courses too. And I find this really interesting how, as a kind of pedagogical problem, right? Because it's all about how do you, where do you teach? Because maybe, I mean, and as we see with thesis, over, too many details sometimes in drawings where you don't need it, and too many layers, because everybody just decides to download Open Street View, like things like this, that there's just always a density of information. And if that is really, how do we combat that is just a kind of open question in terms of drawing, because it shouldn't be seen as, let's say, production, right? It should be seen as a kind of developmental exercise. I hope I get my point through. Anyways, it is 6 o'clock now. We need to go into another meeting, so I would like to stop. We've gone over. I'd like to, thank all the students, thank Philip, Sana, Ludo for being here, and of course, thank Olaf for, again, leading a great seminar. And I believe that everybody has enjoyed all the sessions and the exercise, and it will benefit them greatly in the coming 2 semesters. So until tomorrow, everyone, we hope to see you online for the thesis event in the afternoon. So bye-bye.
Thanks also from my side to you all.